All right, welcome to our next discussion, and this one is on, as you can see, attraction, one of the areas of research by social psychologists. This is our chapter 14 material. And let's first define what we mean by attraction. And simply put, it's the motivation to approach someone else. So, what we're talking about here is it's a very broad definition, and it encompasses both the traditional thing that we think about when we talk about attraction, which is romantic attraction, right? You're motivated to approach someone else that you are romantically interested in. But also, it can encompass a broader type of attraction, and in a non romantic context, like if you find someone who's particularly charismatic, you might be motivated to approach them, right? To maybe try to get to know them, or someone who you think might be a good friend. You could be motivated to approach them for that purpose, to become friends with them. So it's a very broad definition, encompasses all those types of motives to be basically to approach someone else. Now, and of course, most of the types of attraction we're going to talk about in this lecture and most of the research that's been done is on romantic attraction. And so it's going to be probably the focus of our discussion today. Let's talk first about a couple concepts, get those definitions out of the way. Now, these aren't necessarily theories of attraction, but um, one you could say one sort of way of looking at attraction is in terms of its cost benefits or rewards. So let's first talk about the minimax principle, and simply says that in any, like I said, any kind of friendship or romantic relationship, we are motivated to maximize our rewards and minimize our costs. Okay, so we want to maximize your rewards, minimize your costs. And that's what the minimax principle is. Now, with regard to equity, same thing applies here. Again, in friendship relationships or romantic relationships, what we're interested in is this little formula here right in the middle of the slide, uh, that we want to have our outcomes, the ratio of our outcomes to our inputs be equal to the ratio of the other person's outcomes and inputs. Or you could also sort of replace those words with benefits instead of outcomes, and inputs would be costs. Right, so cost benefits, and you want those to be equal, right? Like, so suppose uh, um, it's the case that you're working really hard, so you're putting in a lot of costs, and your outcomes are fairly little, right? You're not getting very much out of the relationship, but your partner is not putting in very much into the relationship and benefiting quite a bit. That is obviously a very inequitable ratio between the two of you. And what it would tends to happen is it should probably, in most people, result in a feeling of that you're being used, or that you're putting in all the work and your partner's not putting in work, so you feel a little resentful toward that partner, and it can be a reason for some people to end the relationship when that becomes inequitable. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, in terms of trying to understand attraction, what makes us attracted towards someone else. Let's talk about the characteristics, first of all, of the perceiver. So that is the one who is feeling the motivation to approach. What is it about us that makes us want to approach someone else? So first thing we want to talk about is self-esteem. And in regard to self-esteem, research shows, for example, that high self-esteem people, it's kind of interesting, are not really motivated to approach. Then their simple reason is because they tend to feel like other people will approach them, and that's been their learning history. They found that in their life that other people are attracted to them and will approach them. So they're not. They know that the party comes to them, and they don't have to expend a lot of energy approaching other people. Now, with low self-esteem people, there's a little bit of a different story. They tend to be very highly motivated to approach, but they don't because of a fear of rejection. Right? So low self-esteem people tend to have that high motive to approach others, but they don't act on it typically because of a fear of rejection. Now, need for affiliation is kind of like a individual difference variable, like a trait. We all sort of, or some of us are high in the need for affiliation, some are low, somewhere in the middle. But what it refers to is, so someone who's, let's say, high in the need for affiliation, that individual wants to be around others. It just means that they want to be around other people. It doesn't mean they have to interact with them, but they like to be around. So, for example, someone who is high in need for affiliation, let's say a college student, um, and rather than study, by themselves in their dorm room all night for the tests, they would much rather prefer to go to, let's say, the library. There's a lot of people around. Of course, everybody's being quiet, but they'll sit in the middle, lots of tables, lots of people sitting at their tables, and quietly study. And they're not really talking to anyone, right? But that's not the point. They just want to be around others. Or they could, sit in the middle of a mall and study, or, there's anywhere where there's a bunch of people. That's what we mean. So, and if you have that high need for affiliation, of course, that is going to influence whether or not you're more or less likely to approach someone else. Need for intimacy is a similar kind of trait-like variable in people. And people who are high in the need for intimacy are people who, now I want to mention something about intimacy. What we're referring to here is emotional intimacy. It doesn't have to, it can encompass romantic or physical intimacy, but much more broadly speaking, we're talking about emotional intimacy. So this need for emotional intimacy is what we would say is people who are high in the need for that. They want to have a couple, maybe between like 1 and 3, maybe just a few really good friends. These are people who they tell all their deep, dark secrets to, and their friends do the same to them. Right? These are your best friends, the ones you lean on and rely on, and who are always there for you. That's what we mean by need for intimacy. Now, some people are low in the need for intimacy. They feel like they're either unwilling or unable to have those kinds of relationships. And interestingly, as a side note, those people tend to not fare very well later on in life. They don't do very well. And simply because if you try to keep yourself like an island unto yourself and you don't have people to vent with and bounce ideas off and, reality test, not necessarily literally but testing ideas out with, and like I said, venting and so on. You try to keep all that in yourself. Those people tend to be more prone to things like depression and neuroses later on in life. Now, what is it about other people, right, the people that we're perceiving, that make us want to approach them? Of course, the obvious one, first of all, is attractiveness, physical attractiveness. Before you even, and this again goes for romantic and friendships. We tend to be more likely to approach someone who's and want to get to know them if they're easy on the eyes, right? And actually, there's a few reasons why we have this bias for beauty. And the first one is, at the very top, aesthetic appeal. Right? The aesthetic appeal meaning that good-looking people are pleasant to look at. It's literally kind of rewarding, and by literally I mean we feel pleasure at looking at someone who is good-looking. That's what it means. Now, a second reason why we have this bias for beauty is what Lang Law calls law of averages. Now, that's kind of a cutesy title, and it'll become clear what we mean by that in a second. In this research, what Langlois did was computer morph different faces together. And you can see on this slide here, on the very left, only two faces are morphed together, as it says. And then right next to it, four faces. That's the composite average of four faces. And then you go 8 and 16 and 32. And you can see all these different faces. Now, what she did then was take these composites that you're looking at right now, right? These are the average faces of 32 or 16, and just basically said, to a group of people, to subjects in her study, rank rate this face on attractiveness on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most attractive. And what she found was that the more faces that were morphed together to form a composite, the more attractive people perceive that composite to be. That is, and the reason why that is kind of interesting, that we, according to Langlois, and there's some other research that supports this, we all kind of have our own idea of what is attractive. And there's a sort of a shared idea of what's attractive. But it's different from society to society, and also over time it's different. But so, for example, supermodels, we say, well, they hit the genetic lottery. Well, maybe that's the case, but the reason why we say that they are supermodels is because their faces tend to be really close to what we all have in our minds of the ideal face. And so when we look at someone, we say, how close is their face to this ideal face that I have in my mind? The more that they are apart from that, the more they deviate from that ideal template, the less attractive we perceive them to be, right? Now, what happens is when you morph faces together, when you average them in a computer program, the individual differences of each person get kind of washed out. And what you're left with is you coming closer and closer to sort of the truth, right, so to speak, the ideal face. And so the more faces that you can morph together, the closer you're coming to that ideal face configuration. And that's why she got the results that she got. Okay, so when we say law of averages, what we're talking about here is faces that are perceived to be closer to this template that we all have in our minds are perceived to be more attractive. Then we have the what is beautiful is good stereotype. And that's another reason why we're drawn to beautiful people. We believe there's a stereotype that says beautiful people have all these great characteristics that you see listed here. They're kind, strong, modest, sensitive, poised, sociable. And we think that they're more prestigious, they're going to have better marriages, they're going to have better careers. It's interesting, and so that's why we're drawn to these beautiful people. Interestingly, as a side note, this is one of the reasons why Ted Bundy, the serial killer, was so successful. By all accounts, he was very charming and a good-looking guy. And so people thought, there's no way that, you would never think that he's a serial killer because he's such a good-looking guy. Right? You'd think that he has all these positive characteristics. So, what is beautiful is good. It turns out, interestingly, that beautiful people are no better than so-called normal-looking people or average-looking people on any of these characteristics, except for two things. They are better in two regards, with regard to two things. One is they have better social skills than most normal people. And that kind of makes sense, right? Because they're invited to more social, functions, and they have more social experiences. And number two is they have more sexual experience, so they're more sexually experienced, and that also probably makes sense. So, but aside from those two aspects of life, Beautiful people are just the same as average-looking people on all these other dimensions. And then the last one is assimilation, the reason why we have these bias for beauty. What assimilation is this research finding that, well, let me define it for you in a second. Let's say that, and what they did with this research is take a picture of like a really, really good looking person, someone who's we rank as a 10, on a scale of 1 to 10. And let's say we take another photo of someone who, let's say, is a 5 or a 6. They get rated a 5 or a 6. And then we just ask people, just to be sure, rate this person on a scale of 1 to 10. And you give them each of these, give out these photographs. And lo and behold, the one that previously was ranked a 10 is a 10. And people say, they look at the separate one of the 5 or a 6, and they say, yeah, that's a 5 or a 6. So now, what happened? Let's do something a little different, and we're going to actually have the 10, the person in the 10, right? That person was ranked a 10, stand next to the individual who got the 5 or 6 rating, right? So you're going to have them stand next to each other, and we're going to take one photo with both of them in it, right? Standing next to each other. And then we say to a separate group of people, rate the attractiveness of each of the people in this one photo. And of course, they say, oh, the 10, the person on the right or wherever they're, the one that was, really, really attractive, they have no problem. They say, yep, boom, 10. That person's amazing looking. But something interesting happens with the one who was previously marked as a 5 or a 6. They now get ratings of like 7 or 8, maybe. Their attractiveness goes up as a result just of standing by someone who's really attractive. So what assimilation means is that we're drawn to, the reason why we're drawn to attractive people is that people will perceive us, we don't necessarily consciously think this, but people see us as more attractive if we hang out with someone who's really attractive. Kind of like their beauty aura, blinds everybody to who's immediately around them. So they get perceived as more attractive. Now, this interesting thing here, liking likers versus pursuing hard to get. What research shows is we're more attracted to people who, well, let's start with who we're least attracted to. People who say no, like who always say no to potential daters. We see them as stuck up, full of themselves, snobby. On the other hand, people who say yes to anyone who asks them out, we're not really attracted to them either, because it seems like they'll date anyone with a pulse, right? That doesn't make us feel special if we ask them out. We're most attracted to kind of like a Goldilocks thing, right? Someone who's right in the middle, who has some standards. They sometimes say no to someone who asks them out, but sometimes they say yes, right? They're not impossible to date. Those are the people, right, that we're most attracted to. Now, let's talk a little bit about the fit between us, between the perceiver and the target, how that guides attraction. And there's this notion of complementarity, or maybe another way of thinking about it is opposites attract. Some of you probably have maybe been in a relationship like this. And what research indicates is that these relationships can work and sometimes can be really great, but they're harder work. You have to work a little harder, and sometimes a lot harder, to keep them working. So the opposites attract types of relationships are more work than those based on similarity. Now, I wanted to sort of take a side note just for a second and talk about this fascinating study by Buss. Buss is an evolutionary psychologist, and he asked people in over 30 countries, men and women, to rank the characteristics of a potential mate. So what's the most important thing you're looking for in a potential mate? Second most important, third most, and so on. The characteristics. And what he found was tremendous similarity across cultures. And what he says that indicates is that our mate preferences are hardwired into us. They're not something that's learned. If it was learned, there'd be great variability between cultures. But because there's a great similarity, high commonality, strong correlation, Buss and others say that that's an indication that these preferences are hardwired into us, our mating preferences. And he's saying, of course, that it's due to these preferences are driven through the eons, through human history, from evolutionary pressures, evolutionary sources and forces. Okay, so let's start with what men want. Number one thing that men across all these cultures are looking for in a potential female mate is youth and beauty. And it's a tie between those two, youth and beauty. And then here's the reason, according to Buss and the other evolutionary psychologists, that men, the whole goal in life, again from an evolutionary standpoint, is to pass on your genes. You want to be able to have kids, right? To have some offspring, and so you want to ideally be in a situation where you can maximize the likelihood that you're going to be successful in passing on your genes. So what you're looking for is someone who's fertile, right? Someone who is a woman who is more likely to be able to get pregnant and successfully bear children. And so youth and beauty are external markers of fertility. Youth, the younger you are, you're more likely to be fertile. And beauty is an external marker for lack of disease and defect. So the more attractive someone is physically, that is a sign of, again, according to the evolutionary view, a lack of defect and disease. Now, it's a different consideration for females in that they need to be a lot more picky with regard to, guys could go around and sow their oats, so to speak, and try to have children with many, many women. But women can't. It's a different consideration because they can, if they're pregnant and then they have to wait, 9 months, and they have this is a whole different set of considerations. So, for women, what they're looking for in a potential mate, the number one thing they're looking for, and again, this is common across all these cultures, is resources. What's broadly interpreted, what Buss says this means is the guy, first of all, has to be just basically successful. So it could mean money, right? But more than that, it means that the guy is, by successful, meaning he's able to provide. He's a good provider, right? She wants to be able to live and survive, and also her child to live and survive. And if she's going to be stationary, again, these are driven from early human history, and she's stationary, she needs to be in one place. She's going to be vulnerable. The child's going to be vulnerable, maybe to predators and attack and other aggressive males. And she's not going to be able to run around the forest and try to hunt for food and, kill animals and whatever, or get out in the field and, try to take care of their agriculture and so on. She needs to stay in one place with the child. And so she needs a male to go out and get the food and bring it back, and also to protect her and so on. So the guy has to be successful. He has to have resources. He has to have the skills to pay the bills, right? The guy has to have his act together. That's what she's looking for in a potential mate. And of course, it would be nice if the guy stayed around, if he was monogamous, right, and stayed with her. So that's what, and by the way, if you're wondering what about physical attractiveness, it's number 5 or 6 on the list for women, which is kind of interesting as well. Next, so again, I want to just sort of tie this up, this particular discussion. This research exchange study, I just bring this up because it's another view of what drives our, what are the forces that motivate us to approach. And Buss is saying there's these very ancient, evolutionarily formed forces that guide our mating preferences, even though we're not aware of it. And some people would say, "Oh, that sounds really sexist." You know, that's fine, but he's got some really compelling data to support that. Okay, now similarity, we can kind of disregard that thing on the bottom. We're not going to talk about that yet. Is the thing that tends to guide most of our feelings of attraction towards someone else. You know, people go on a date and they come back and say, "How's your date?" "Oh, it was great. We have so much in common," right? And that's seen as a good thing, right? Similarity, common interests. You know, you're coming from same background. You have a lot of the same, maybe your same religion, same hometown, same, same age. Maybe you're also similar in personality and mood, right? Optimists are attracted to optimists. Pessimists, misery loves company, so pessimists like other pessimists, and so on. Similarity and attractiveness. Now, this is what this picture refers to. This is an old picture of Julia Roberts and Lyle Lovett, way back before she really got to be a superstar. She was just starting. I want to say maybe this is around the time I think one of her first movies was Mystic Pizza. And this might be like shortly around that time, right? Maybe right after that. And, so Julie Roberts, very beautiful, traditional beauty. And Lyle Lovett he's a country singer, and he's not regarded as someone who is fitting the traditional, male model approach. And so some people thought that was kind of an unusual pairing back then. And they didn't go out too long. I don't think it was very long before they broke up. But the reason I put that here is because when we're talking about physical attractiveness, the matching hypothesis, and there's a lot of data to support it, says this, that people are, when you're looking for a potential mate, you're more drawn to someone who is in your league, so to speak, right? Who is in your league, meaning, we kind of know where we are on the scale of 1 to 10. And so we tend to choose someone who is at the same level of attractiveness as we are. And there's a good reason for that. Let's say that let's say you're a 7. It's unnerving maybe a little bit, and maybe a little weird, awkward for you to date someone who's a 10, or consider marrying someone who's a 10. And the reason is because you're thinking, oh, at any moment they're going to realize that they're settling for me, right? Or that my partner is going to dump me like a bad habit when they realize that I'm less attractive than they are. It's waiting for the other shoe to drop, and it's very uncomfortable, anxiety provoking, and so on, to date someone who's a lot hotter than you are. And on the other hand, it's a little unsettling to date someone who's much less attractive than you are, because then now you're thinking, let's say you're a 7 and you're dating someone who's a 3, right? And you're thinking, wow, I don't want to. Their faces kind of scares me a little bit every time I see them. You don't want that to happen for the rest of your life, right? So again, that's why we choose someone who's in our league. And then attitude similarity, right? And this I mentioned a little earlier. Political attitudes, social attitudes, you're more likely to be attracted to someone who's the same. Now, the situation can also bias and guide our attraction to someone. And let's see if we have this here. Propinquity Now, what this refers to is how close you are physiologically, not physiologically, physically next to someone. And what this research shows is that this is research by Festinger back in 1950. Next door, 2 doors away, other end of the hall. I think this was, I want to say either apartments or dorms. Um, and found that, so who are you most attracted to, or who are you most likely to become friends with? The people that are closest to you, geographically, more likely to be, and that may tend to be just because of how easy and convenient it is to talk to these people. You're more likely to get to know someone who's a neighbor rather than 2 doors away or other end of the hall, right? So that kind of makes sense. And here's a little graph. Okay. Now let's talk about attribution and reactance, those two concepts. Now, this is interesting. This study by Bernstein, as I talked about, Bernstein had males come to the lab. It was like a big classroom, and it was divided right in half with like a big divider, like a cubicle divider. And on each side of of this divider, there's 2 TVs with like a VCR setup back then. I think it was a VCR. And they had chairs in front of these TVs. And in front of one of the TVs was a very attractive female undergrad who's pretending to be a subject, but she's really working with the experimenter. So she's just sitting there, like, pretending to be someone who's waiting for the experiment to begin, sitting in one of the chairs. And so he would meet the guy. This guy would come to the doorway of the classroom. The experimenter would meet them and say, to half of the guys, he would say, what we're going to do is we're going to play a video on each side of on both TVs, and but it's going to be different video on each side. You can sit wherever you want. It doesn't matter where you sit. And then we'll ask you some questions about the video that you saw. Okay. And for the other half of the guys who showed up, he said, same thing, we're going to play a video on each side, and it's the same video on each, so it doesn't really matter where you sit. You can choose wherever you want to sit. Now, so the question is, where do the guys choose to sit? And in the different, let's say the same video condition. Let's start with that one. Same video on both sides. Only 25% of them sat by the woman when it's the same video. And in the different video condition, 75% of the men sat by the woman. Right, so same video, 25%. Different video, 75%. The reason why is what he calls attributional ambiguity. Now, attribution is this idea that we have to try to figure out the reason why someone is doing something or saying something. We're always trying to figure that out, right? Like, why did she say that? Why did he do that? There's usually 2 reasons. One is either their personality or the environment that's causing them to behave that way. Okay, so let's go back to the experiment. And the female, we're talking about getting inside the female's mind. If the guy sits by her, right, and the guy knows this, and he knows that she knows this, he's saying to himself, okay, if I sit by her, I really want to sit by her. But if it's the same video, I'm kind of reluctant to sit by her because she's going to know, really basically, that there's only one reason why I'm sitting over here by her. It's not due to the video. It's due to the fact that I want to be by her. And that's, right, and she's going to make that same assumption, that attribution. Oh, he's sitting by me because of, not because of the environment or the video, it's because of me. Right, because the video is the same. There's only one causal reason, right, which would be me. He wants to sit by me. I know he likes me. And the guy and that's too intimidating for the guy, right? She's going to know I like her. So that's why most of the guys sit on the other side. But if you give the guy kind of a cover, right, to make it ambiguous, she now is thinking to herself, why is he sitting by me? Is it because he's interested in this particular video because they're different now on each side. He wants to watch a video. That's why he's sitting over here by me. Or is he interested in me? I don't know. And the guy knows that she doesn't know. And he's got it covered. It's like, hey, how's it going? Oh, yeah, I'm totally interested in watching this. They said this video is about the African dung beetles. I'm all about African dung beetles. I'm telling you. It's just, it's amazing. So, when we were, and you may have done this before with your friends, have like you call them up and say, let's say there's someone who's you're really interested in asking out, but it's too intimidating to ask them out directly. So what you would do is you'd say, call them up and say, hey, a bunch of us are going to do X, or we're all going bowling, or we thought you'd like to come along. You want to come along? And then you've got a group. It's like it's non-threatening, and the person doesn't know why you asked them to come. Is it because of the group, or is it because you particularly are interested in them? They don't know. Now we've got the sort of the best for last. We've got the psychological reactance. This Pennebaker, back in the 70s, there was a guy named Mickey Gilley, who's a country singer, and he had a song called "Don't All the Girls Get Prettier at Closing Time?" And country songs are great for that. And so what he did was he wanted to test this out. Not Mickey Gilley, but Pennebaker. So what he did was he had research assistants go to bars in, I want to say it's either Austin or Houston, maybe. Let's say Austin. At early in the night, so like at 7 o'clock. 3 different bars. And they get there and they say to people in the bars, men and women, hey, I'd like to, they tell them what they're doing some research. We would like you to rate the attractiveness of people throughout the night. Are you interested? Sure. And so they got ratings from these people at 7 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and 1 o'clock, which is closing time. And so they go through the night, they get the ratings, and then they look at the results, and just what he predicted, that as the night wore on, people's ratings went up and up and up. Their perceptions of the attractiveness of other people increased. Now, as a side note, one of the problems with the study was he didn't account for alcohol consumption, right? The beer goggle effect. So he had to go back and redo the experiment, and this time account for how much alcohol people consume. And interestingly enough, got the same exact results, even when you factor out the influence of alcohol. Same results. Okay, so that's pretty impressive. Now, how do you explain this interesting finding that people now, again, I want to emphasize, the attractiveness of the targets did not really increase, like they magically morphed throughout the night. That didn't happen. The perception, right? The perceivers, right? Their perceived perceived attractiveness went up and up and up. Right? They were perceived to be more attractive. Okay, so how do you explain this? Pennebaker explains this through something called reactance. Reactance is this idea that when someone or something threatens your ability to do a free behavior, you feel a bunch of things happen. One of the things that happens is you feel this aversive feeling, right? It's the negative feeling. And you feel like you want to, number one, you want to do the thing that's being threatened, right? Right? So if someone says you can't do it, you say, what do you say? You're not the boss of me. I can do whatever I want. And you want to do it. But another thing that happens is the attractiveness of the forbidden thing increases. Right? If someone or something says you cannot have this, you can't do this, all of a sudden you feel like, wow, this thing is really attractive. Now I really want it. So this is what's happening according to Pennebaker with these people that are being rated. At the beginning of the night, according to Pennebaker, what the perceivers are thinking to themselves, kind of in the back of their heads, I can ask any of these people out anytime I want. I've got a lot of time to ask them out. At the beginning of the night, right? They got the whole night. As the night wears on, though, what's happening is your freedom to ask them out is being more and more threatened, right? Because the time is ticking away. Time is ticking away, and your freedom to ask them out is more and more threatened until at the very end of the night, you've only got seconds, maybe, like a couple minutes or seconds to ask them out. And that's where you have the most threat to your freedom to ask them out. And that's why they are perceived as the most attractive, right? That free behavior is most threatened at that time. Just as a side note, this is also a thing that advertisers use, retailers use. They say limited time only, right? And the reason is they're trying to get you to buy the thing. And it works usually really well because people say to themselves, oh, you mean I can only have this, I can only buy this during a certain time? My free behavior to buy it is threatened. And so the thing that they're selling is perceived as more attractive. And then they go and buy, or they'll say limited quantities, or 4-hour sale only, this, that, and the other. And those tactics work tremendously. And by the way, this is also another thing, you may have heard of this anecdotally, that people who are single and then get married report that once they have a ring on their finger, they get hit on or proposed to, or not maybe formally proposed, but hit on and asked out, flirted with a lot more once they have their ring on, right? Once they got married. And the simple reason is reactance. That people, when they see that you don't have any ring on your finger, they say, oh, I can ask them out anytime, right? My freedom to ask them out is not being threatened. But once you have a ring on, what you're saying to the world is, I'm off the market. You cannot have me. I am a forbidden fruit, right? And they're saying, they may be saying to themselves, you can't, I'm not going to let a little ring get, stop me. And they perceive something that is forbidden as more attractive. By the way, that's the thing that happens with kids and, of course, with like teenagers. You say to your teenager, I forbid you to date so-and-so. That's like the worst thing you can do, because what you're saying essentially is, this person's off limits. So now they're really attractive to you, right? And then they're getting the teenagers. Now, of course, who do they want to date? They only want to date the one who's off limits because they're seen as the most attractive. Okay. Hope you enjoyed our discussion, and I'll see you at our next discussion.